Welcome to the podcast, which I think we're going to call the Delingpod, with me, James Delingpole. And I've got such an exciting guest for you this week, and another guest coming up a bit later on in the show. His name is Ed Dutton. He is the adjunct professor of anthropology. Adjunct professor of anthropology at the University of Oulu in northern Finland. Get that. Ed, you're going to be amazing, I know, because I've already spoken to you for a few minutes, and you seem to know all sorts of weird, interesting stuff about everything.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, sorry.
I don't disappoint.
So have I frightened you? Now, look, where do you want to start? Because you've got lots of different books that you've written recently.
Well, there's a number of books that I've had coming out recently. One of them that a lot of people have been talking about is called "How to Judge People by What They Look Like," and it does pretty much what the title says.
Are you judging me now?
I've been doing so for the last 20 minutes. Yes,
And,
to at the station.
And what have you?
Well, you're what's called a leptosomatic. So your body type is skinny, ectomorphic, we call it, and it correlates with certain anxiety, this sort of thing. But let's not personalise things.
No, I'm interested. I want to know what's wrong with me. Anxiety, yeah.
And if you show me your hand,
Yeah.
So that the hands are quite feminine, which implies relatively low levels of testosterone,
Right.
by a man's standard. Like me, I mean, you're not particularly muscular. Again,
I do try.
Well, we all try, but there's one important muscle that perhaps we both use more than. And so again, there's a certain personality type that goes with this. You see, because people are either. We have a limited amount of bioenergetic resources. So, and you're under evolution. What do you invest in? If you're in a situation where it's unstable, and where it's relatively easy, like a hot country, let's say, then essentially you have to live fast and die young because it's unstable. Now, what you do in those circumstances is you invest your energy in demonstrating clearly your genetic quality, and also the kind of qualities which women like in situations like that, which is that you're muscular, that you're strong, that you can defend them, that sort of thing.
So, like if I were a sort of a Nuba tribesman, I'd have to be big and strong, and with a huge willy. And all that.
The research on penis size and personality is a bit unclear, but certainly in general, you would invest in secondary sexual characteristics. In order to demonstrate conspicuously to your audience, to the women, that you're the kind of person they want, and you wouldn't invest so much in personality, in having the kind of personality that the woman can tell will look after her, will invest, will stay with her and look after the kids, because in an ecology like that's not important. You could be wiped out at any moment.
Yeah.
So there's no point investing in a person's mind.
So me and Woody Allen, we wouldn't stand a prayer in southern Sudan.
In somewhere like that, no, it wouldn't. You wouldn't do well under
natural
selection. But here, yes, here. Look at the salubrious surroundings we're sitting in. This is radio, but yes. So precisely, so that's exactly it. So therefore, you have a certain kind of body which goes with being evolved to this unstable ecology. You see, which is the body pronounced secondary sexual characteristics,
right.
So that you can be easily identified and you look good. As you move away from that, people towards a more stable and a colder ecology, then you reach the carrying capacity for the species for that ecology. And once that happens, the species members start to compete more strongly with each other. And once they do that, because the environment is predictable, if you, let's say, just have loads and loads of children with loads and loads of women, but there's no quality aspect to it, not evolved to the ecology, then they could all just die.
Yeah.
And so what you start to do is you start to have fewer children and invest more in them. And also, those offspring the selection pressure becomes higher and they start to become more adapted to the ecology. Now, what that means, what helps you survive in an ecology like that, is brains. You have to be able to form groups. Groups more likely to survive. That means, in a harsh ecology, that means cooperation. That means a certain kind of personality. Intelligence helps you to survive in a difficult ecology, in a cold ecology, in a predictable ecology, because impulse control, which is about predicting things and so on and behaving accordingly, correlates with intelligence. So therefore it selects for intelligence. And you've only got a limited amount of bioenergetic resources, remember. So you start to move away from investing in the body and you move towards investing in the mind.
I was waiting for that
And
bit.
so if you think about, a good example is the size of women's boobs. So there is some. It took me quite a long time to find it because it's been published in obscure places. Because even when it was published in like the 70s, it was still a rather taboo thing to discuss. But there really is evidence that a certain kind of personality correlates with having large breasts, large buttocks,
Bubbly, sexually
voracious. The term that's used in psychology is sociosexual. So a person who is a fast life history strategist. So that is a person. If you are a fast life history strategist, you will tend to be low in what's called agreeableness, i.e., you're not a very nice person. You're selfish, basically. You will be low in what's called conscientiousness, i.e., you will have low impulse control. If you like, you'll have the personality of an artist. Right, which those do have, and you will be, in terms of neuroticism, I think you'll be more inclined to be mentally unstable because there's less selection when there's an easy ecology. There's less selection against mental instability, so mental instability is higher.
Yes.
Higher in terms of extroversion, because extroversion, although it makes you sociable, it makes you take risks.
Yes.
And because you enjoy things and you take risks because you get the payoff. And so high extroversion. So the stereotype of the bubbly, well-betitted female it really is empirically accurate.
Right.
And then the extreme, if a woman has, but that woman will be sociosexual. She'll be more likely to have an affair. She'll be more likely to cuckold you, which is the worst thing in evolution, of course, to be cuckolded.
Yes.
So.
Tell me why that is.
Well, obviously, because it means that you're not passing. You're not passing on your genes, and B, you're helping someone else who's a rival to pass on their genes.
Cuckoo in the nest.
Cuckoo in the nest, precisely. Yeah. So therefore, if you are the kind of, and interestingly, they found that the kind of men who are sexually attracted to women like that, i.e., women that have big boobs, big arse, those men are themselves sociosexual. So they are the types who they will love them and leave them. They want to just have a short-term investment, pass on their genes, not invest much in the woman, and have lots of sexual partners and whatever. Right. So they're actually attracted to the kind of women that in evolution they should be attracted to. Whereas if you take it the other way around, if a woman has relatively flat breasts, relatively unpronounced secondary sexual characteristics, she will tend to be the kind of woman who is high in agreeableness, who won't have an affair, who won't love you, who will cooperate. She'll be a good mother. She'll be good in this what we call K ecology, in this stable yet harsh ecology. Be able to look after the children and so on. But she won't she won't be religious perhaps, and she won't have an affair. You can trust her, and equally the kind of man that fancies her is the kind of man who is investing again personality more in his brain.
It's funny
his body.
You say this because I'm not a tits man.
Are you not?
No. Is that another characteristic of people of my?
Well, that's yeah. I mean, in the sense that what kind of a man are you? Are you a
well, no. I mean, I'm not saying I don't like tits. I mean, I do. I like their shape and everything, and if they're there, all well and good. But it's not top of the list of my priorities.
What's top of the list?
I'm definitely a looks.
A face.
Yeah, face.
Well, that's quite relevant actually, because of course with the face, the face is the most important way of reading information into people.
Yeah.
We're evolved to understand the face, and the face is the best way, which we can move on to in a bit if you want, of reading personality, of understanding a person's what they're going to be like and how clever they are. Whatever. It's all from the face. So you would expect a person who was what we call a K strategist, i.e., a person who is investing more in the mind than the body because they evolved to a stable ecology, to be particularly interested in the face, because it's the face that is the window to the soul.
The soul, yeah.
It's the face that is telling you those things you really want to know. Whereas the kind of person who would be not interested in the face, who are mainly interested in secondary sexual characteristics, they just want to know that the person has reasonably good genes, is reasonably likely to get pregnant, and that their brief copulation is not itself a waste of time. And so that these factors have to be advertised as quickly and conspicuously as possible in an unstable ecology. And the way you do that, of course, is size, up to a degree.
Right.
Size.
So we know that the Victorians were obsessed with phrenology and so on, and then later generations dismissed this as a kind of weird thing the Victorians did that we don't do now. Were the Victorians, in fact, right?
Well, phrenology is a different thing. Phrenology is that you measure this idea that the brain is an organ, and therefore it will reflect in its in small differences the nature of the person, and you can sort of fill their bumps. There might be a kernel of truth in that, in so much as we know that if a person has brain damaged and there's part of the brain that is atrophied, then that will affect the related part of their personality or whatever. But basically that's...
Okay, so going back to the faces then. So the more intelligent you are, the more likely you are to be drawn to somebody's face rather than their...
I'm not aware they've specifically... But certainly that would be what would be implied, because there's so much information about the character that is readable from the face, whereas all you can read from large breasts is a propensity to be sociosexual and reasonably good gene quality such that you can grow large breasts in the face of childhood illness or whatever.
Briefly, a brief digression, why is it that in rap culture, why is it that in black culture, they are completely obsessed with the size of a woman's ass? Why do black men seem to be unusually attracted to big bottoms?
Well, I'm not aware that they've definitely proved it, but I suppose one possibility is that if you were living in an ecology where you bond with people, in an ecology that is stable yet harsh, it's important to create strong social bonds. And because it's important to create strong social bonds, it's important to know how somebody else is feeling, it's important to know how somebody else is thinking, and it's important to look at somebody, and that's how you bond with somebody. We're looking at each other now, and there's a degree to which it involves bonding. And therefore, if these people are going to have sex, these people that are into bonding, you'd expect them to be looking at each other when they have sex.
Right.
Whereas among the kind of people you're talking about, if the ecology is historically extremely unstable, then bonding is far less important.
Right.
And so therefore it makes sense to have sex, as it were, from behind. And therefore to be more attracted to buttocks. There may well be something to do, other factors involved as well, that I'm not aware of. So, for example, there is evidence that black people have relatively small testicles.
Really?
Smaller than white people's, yeah.
Right.
Now, I don't know if that's relevant. J. Philippe Rushton argued that the nature of the penis is different. So that an erect white penis is kind of at a slightly askew sort of Bill Clinton-esque angle,
right.
but is relatively sort of firm, hard.
Right.
Whereas that of a black person kind of bends. So it's almost like they are evolved to have sex from that position.
Right.
And so that would make sense they would follow to be attracted.
This I haven't read this in the newspapers very much.
I haven't read it that much in the Guardian, but I'm sure they'll do something on it if I pitch it. But yes, so it would make sense that you'd have this difference whereby Europeans would be perhaps more attracted to breasts and the blacks would be perhaps more attracted to buttocks.
Yeah.
In fact, I think there was something. I have to check the book, but I think there was something in the study I did which found that an arse man was higher in mental instability than a breast man, but
right.
I'd have to check that.
Well, I do quite like arses, actually.
Well, I mean, it could be argued that breasts are basically evolved to look like arses. So
yeah.
you get the benefit of the arse plus the bonding aspect.
I hadn't thought about that, but that is quite true.
Yeah. So I think that there could be something in that. And one of the things as well with bonding.
Yeah.
Is that I did what was an encyclopedia article really for the journal of for the Encyclopedia of Evolutionary Psychological Science, and I did it on fellatio. That was the subject I was asked to do it on. I don't know why they thought I'd know a great deal about that, but anyway, that was what they felt I should write about. And there are race differences in fellatio. The level of black people who are fellated, that they're less likely to fellate each other than white people.
I've heard this.
And also,
some of them really think it's quite disgusting.
And also lower in cunnilingus than white people.
Yeah.
And the tendency among white people is to move from petting and so on to fellatio to sex, whereas with black people it's sex first and then fellatio comes later if they feel like it. And the suggestion is that there's two dimensions here. Firstly, what is the purpose of fellatio? So one is to simply pleasure another person.
Yeah.
So therefore, if it's about bonding. If you're lower in bonding, then there'll be less of an inclination to fellate people. It will be, as it were, a waste of energy. A second element is that there's evidence that that women who fellate their husbands regularly and swallow are less likely to suffer from preeclampsia and so less likely to miscarry. And you have fellatio in animals as well. You have it among bats. So presumably it's the same thing. If you swallow your husband's semen, the body treats the semen as an enemy agent the white blood cells treat it as an enemy agent to a lesser extent, and so it's more likely to get through.
Oh.
Of course, that can only happen if if you are in an ecology where you're heavily bonding with the husband, where you're regularly with him and so on,
Yes.
rather than a quick fling. And so it would follow that people that evolve to these complex ecologies where you're more likely to have long-term relationships will be more inclined towards fellatio, and those that would be from the ecologies where everything's quick and live fast and die young will be less inclined towards it.
Right. Well, I learned a lot there. Yeah. Okay.
But this is digressing substantially from the subject of the book, which of course is physiognomy, what you can learn from a face, what you can learn from so on. So, I mean, one of the important things about these markers is that one of them doesn't say that much. So I have a full head of hair, and you're losing it a bit, and having that is a sign of testosterone, of going bald is a sign of high testosterone. You see.
Oh, but my girly fingers say I've got.
Fingers say otherwise. So you have to think about the direction of the markers.
Right.
You can't just take one mark. You can't say
Right.
he's bald, therefore he has high testosterone. Although it is generally true, if you talk to doctors, that men that are going to the age 60 saying they're impotent do tend to have full heads of hair.
Right.
But you've got to take all of them together, kind of thing. So with the face shape, for example, you have a narrow face. I have a narrow face. A narrow face is low testosterone marker. So it's implying a low level of aggressiveness, a high level of agreeableness, high level of impulse control, that sort of thing. And in
Right.
general, as it were, what we call a K strategy, i.e. being evolved to this more stable ecology within race. Within race, I mean, because of course there are other factors. And then you have hair color. That in general, the darker the hair, the higher the testosterone. And which is why if you notice when two lions have a fight, it's the darker maned lion that will tend to win.
Right.
He's darker, he's got higher testosterone levels. Skin, again, darkness of skin, it reflects melanonin, and melanonin correlates with testosterone. So people within race that have darker skin tend to have a higher level. It's a marker of testosterone. There's all kinds of other things that you can read into the face in terms, obviously, of secondary sexual characteristics in a man, if there's a chin and a nose and whatever, if they're pronounced. This is, again, a matter of testosterone.
So
you can
is there a correlation between, say, nose size and willy size and that kind of?
I'm not aware that there's a correlation between nose size and willy size.
But there is with sex drive. The bigger the nose means you're going to have higher testosterone.
No, I'm not aware that.
No.
Then there are other issues. So eyes. So the Chinese did some research on how close together your eyes are, and they found that if people's eyes are beyond a certain ratio, then those people are more likely to be criminals. And this makes sense in so much as we are evolved to be a cooperative society. And so since the Industrial Revolution, the degree of selection has basically collapsed. I mean, at that point, 40% of children people died before they reached adulthood. By 1880 or something, it was 10%. And now it's about 1%. And so it follows that all of these genes that would have been selected against, including things to be antisocial and so on, would have increased, and they would be correlated with the physical abnormalities, as it were, would be correlated with mental abnormalities. These things tend to be comorbid, and so it follows that the eyes are going to be closer together among people that are more inclined to be violent or whatever. And this is what the Chinese have found. Basically, people that are physically unattractive or ugly are more prone to criminality.
Right.
And so then there was the nature of the eyes. There was some research published recently, and again, I don't know how, perhaps this could be noticed unconsciously, but how large a person's pupils are at rest, controlling how much light's going in.
Yeah.
And the larger the pupils, the cleverer the person. Now, one possible explanation for that, of course, is that the cleverer, what solving a problem involves is dealing with massive information and coming up to a solution. So the more subtle is the information you can take in, the better you can solve the problem, and so therefore the higher IQ score you're going to get. Consistent with this, there's evidence that colour discrimination correlates with intelligence. The better you are at discriminating against different colours, because you're seeing more, you're taking in more subtlety, and this is why at very high IQ levels, really fantastically high, people are often kind of almost like autistic because of obsessed with noise, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Because they're just taking in so much information. They're sort of hypersensitive. So that's the eyes, the pupils. Are therefore relevant as well. The size of the eyes are relevant. So if people have big eyes, large eyes, then this tends to be low testosterone. They have narrow eyes. Think of the Donald Trump, for example. He's a prime example of a high testosterone male. He has narrow eyes. He's got this manly facial shape. He's got wide face. He's balding, and his hands as well. If you look at them, which is another relevant thing, he has what's called 2D 4D ratio. I mentioned to you earlier about your hands. So if you have hands like mine or yours to a lesser extent, the difference between the little finger and the biggest finger, this is called the 2D 4D ratio.
Right.
And women have it's a big difference.
Right.
Men, their hands are more like shovels. There's little difference, and that's a testosterone marker as well.
Right.
So there are all kinds of ways. Another one is just, as I said, I mentioned earlier, physical unattractiveness. It's been found that facial symmetry, that the essence of beauty is symmetry.
Yeah.
And the reason for that is because it shows that we've been able to maintain, we're meant to be symmetrical or we'd fall over. We've managed to maintain a symmetrical phenotype in the face of disease and so on as children. And so therefore we have good genes and therefore, as it were, a low level of mutational load. And therefore people are attracted to that, obviously, because then therefore their issue with you are more likely to survive. And so it's been found that there's a weak negative correlation between basically how good looking you are and intelligence. So people who are intelligent are better looking.
Right. That's a bit unfair, isn't it?
Well, it's a modest relationship, but I mean, I'm afraid it's the way of things. And when you say this thing unfair, I mean, this is the important issue. It's that with this kind of research, I don't know if it's a kind of autistic aspect to me, but I really don't. It's not what's fair is not it's not relevant. Science isn't fair or unfair or kind or unkind. It just is. It's either empirically accurate or it isn't.
Yes.
And I think this is the important. This is a problem we've got to, and it's got worse and worse over my lifetime. That you can't make assertions that are palpably true for fear of offending some mutant or whatever, and who'll then kick up a big fuss and try and get you fired from your job. We have to fight against this, and I think that's one of the reasons why the book was talked about a great deal when I published this myself, because I thought there's no way I'll find a publisher. A, it's quite short, and B, there's no way I'll find anyone that'll publish this other than some obscurity. So I might as well just do it myself. And I was amazed by how it kind of took off.
Tell us the title of the book.
How to Judge People by What They Look Like.
And you can buy it from Amazon.
Amazon.
Whatever.
I published it on Amazon.
So, did it make you any money?
Yeah, I haven't actually checked yet because I haven't done my taxes for next year yet. But it certainly, I mean, if I look at the sales rank, it's constantly selling. Yeah.
I mean, it's more than a chap, the average adjunct professor at Oulu University gets.
It's certainly sold more copies than all my other books that I've ever done.
Right.
And but there's so many levels on which this works, and so you really can. I mean, the key message is that no matter what the liberal left may tell you, but whatever we're told at school about, don't judge people on what they look like, it's what's inside that's important. And okay, there's a degree to which that's true, but I'm afraid it's just an empirical fact.
Yeah.
You can read, and also let's think about a set of circumstances. That a lot of these leftist ideas are highly impractical. And one thing that's impractical is you're walking home at night, it's dark, there's someone coming up to you. Do you cross the road?
Yeah.
Do you avoid them? And we all do things like this. We all judge people by their appearance. I mean, are we really supposed to be saying that if our parents, made a point of marrying somebody who they found physically repulsive and whatever? Of course not. It's totally hypocritical to say that. We all do this, but the point is that there is detailed empirical research behind it that goes under the radar, basically.
Yeah.
In a way that other research doesn't. And I've brought this all together, and it's...
Well, it does strike me, Ed, that you are something of an anomaly in modern academe, because it is, particularly in subjects like anthropology. I mean, anthropology, is it not riddled with politically correct types trying to sort of promote a narrative?
I think a better word is infested. But I've essentially moved out of that. I mean, it was in 2012 I was doing culture, understanding the nature of Finnish culture by sitting in people's sitting rooms and writing down what I saw. And I've very much moved away from that now. It's very much evolutionary psychology and intelligence. So that's what I publish, and I published in intelligence, in personality differences, in these various journals. And that's now the area.
So, yeah, but just tell me a bit about the barriers that you've had to getting your work out. With the book that we're going to talk about later, how to... At Our Wits' End. Extraordinary book.
This is a book which was where two, I won't name them, but two very, very famous university presses were well up for publishing this. But then they sent it out for review.
Yeah.
One reviewer said, "This is brilliant, brilliant, brilliant." The other said, "Oh God, no, this is evil." And so, of course, they both rejected it. In another case of a very, very famous publisher in America, it actually got through the review, and then it was taken to the board of the publishers and by the very enthusiastic commissioning editor, and she had to write back and say, "I can't believe this, but they won't have it." They say, "No, this is going to damage our reputation."
Right.
So we've had tremendous trouble getting that out with a reasonable venue that will get you publicity or whatever, and then with papers as well, you find that they get rejected based on completely unreasonable emotional criticisms. I once had a reviewer, anonymous reviewer, who just directly accused me of being a Nazi. He didn't know who I am.
I was thinking about the Nazi thing. I reading your book this morning, reading At Our Wits' End, I was thinking, the left are not even going to engage with this book. They're just going to say, Nazis, eugenics, whatever.
Even though we do a whole section where we look at the issue that it's nothing to do with that, but they don't.
That's not how they work.
No, they don't work like that because they're kind of partially schizophrenic and they see conspiracy theories everywhere. They can't think in a rational way. That's what autistics do. They think in a rational, logical way, and that's why they tend to come out with this kind of stuff. But there've been tremendous problems in these terms. I recently applied just for a laugh, really, just to see what would happen. I recently applied to join the Galton Institute, which used to be known as the Eugenics Society,
right,
but has since been entried. They said, "Thank you for your application. I'm afraid we're going to have." We had a meeting. We're rejecting your application because some of your papers, some of what we found on your website, gave us cause for concern.
Yeah,
so
and that's enough, isn't it? Cause for concern.
Cause for concern. It's such a vague thing, So, of course, you end up with a situation where academia. I don't know if you've read any stuff by Joanna Williams, but she looks at the kind of the leftist infiltration of academia. We had a situation in the 19th century where academia was dominated by the church, and it was basically a mouthpiece of the church, and it did no proper research. Proper research took place by gentlemen scholars like Charles Darwin, by enthusiastic amateurs like Thomas Edward, the Aberdeenshire shoemaker, who knew a lot about geology, and by people with patrons. That was where research was going on, right? And scholar rectors as well.
Right.
And the university was it was about training lawyers, training doctors, and the church, about religion. And we've moved back to that, I think.
Right.
And so consequently, you're going to get more and more people who find a niche, as I have and as my colleague has, in kind of being semi-connected to academia, but to a certain extent independent scholars who are funded by various kind people, and therefore can do research which they could never do within the university. They just couldn't do it.
Are you given a salary as an adjunct professor?
No. It's various funding sources.
So you attach to the university, and people
do occasional teaching,
and people sponsor your position there.
No. People sponsor me personally.
Yeah.
It just when I was an anthropologist, the head of department there was very impressed by 2010. This was by my research as an anthropologist, and so she said, "Do you want to be what's called a docent?" It's a rank above a PhD, really, that exists in Scandinavian countries,
right.
Which translates as adjunct professor. So that's a separate thing. But the it's and Finland. I've lived there for 13 years. And the time I've lived there, it's got worse and worse in terms of even there. But they're much more open to this. You're much safer as a person researching this kind of thing in Finland than you are in England.
Right.
But yeah, that's
well, yes. Your experiences are surely similar to those of with the bell curve, with Charles Murray.
Well, I suppose so. Obviously, his thing got so much publicity that his experience would have been rather worse.
He had a horrible time. But it does seem to me that how long ago was the bell curve? It was quite
94.
a while. 94. That here we are. That it's still impossible, pretty much, to say what science tells us in these fields.
And not just science, but also history.
Right.
And that was the other thing I wanted to talk to you about, which was another book that I did. I've got coming out next year. Churchill's Headmaster, the sadist who nearly saved the British Empire. And
I like the way you just completely segued there from...
Well, I just felt,
No,
you know,
why not?
we're up against it.
Absolutely.
But I thought it was subtle. I was very good when I did A-level English at doing paragraph links.
Right.
I was renowned for my excellent paragraph. People would give me their A-level English papers and say, "Can you link these paragraphs?" But yes, I thought I was quite pleased with that. But so even with that, you have this politicization of history in a left-wing direction, and that politicization seems to be that 1945 was the year dot. Churchill is our greatest Briton. Hitler is, we won't even mention his name, and that the appeasers before the war were just the most appalling people, you know, and that, I mean, Rab Butler, for example, he was an appeaser before the war, and his political career was to a certain extent, you know, he could never become Tory leader. On those grounds, and he didn't. It was Alec Douglas Hume, and it's another area which I guess I don't know. It's sort of contrarian in me.
Are you saying that the appeasers were in fact woefully underrated, and that we
yes,
should be
I'm saying they're
respected?
completely right.
Right.
And so we have this myth at the moment, this idea that Churchill is the greatest man ever. He's the hero. He's brilliant. He's perfect. You know, there he is. This people's aristocrat with a cigar in one hand and a V for Victory in the other,
Yeah.
you know, and he's a wonderful man. And all this in spite of his evil headmaster, his evil prep school headmaster, Herbert Snade Kinnersley, under whom he toiled for 2 years, being beaten on the bare buttocks every day until he excreted, and all this kind of
That's what
thing.
they say. That's
Yeah, so you've got a book at the moment by a woman called Anna Seba, which states that Snake Kinnersley used to take pleasure in beating these boys until they excreted, and then he took further sexual pleasure in cleaning their excrement off the wall, their explosions of excreta
And do we have any evidence
off
for
the
this?
walls. Right, well, not good evidence, no. Well, certainly not that it was a regular thing. We have one very biased source that asserted something like that happened. A source who, on every other thing, is very unreliable and who's clearly very biased against the headmaster in question.
Right.
So I started thinking, is this right about Churchill? And once I realised it wasn't, once I realised that there was no reason to go to war, we weren't going to be invaded, we weren't fighting for democracy. I mean, Poland was a very nasty dictatorship.
Right.
It was a nationalist dictatorship. It was discriminated heavily and violently against it. It even had like a national anti-German day. So that's out. It wasn't to do with saving Jewish people, because we didn't know about that when the war started. Moreover, we knew about they were discriminated against. We knew about that. All they were driven out of the country or whatever. But I mean,
Sure, and I buy that. But what do you think would have happened? Say we'd stayed out of it once Hitler had finished conquering Europe, continental Europe, and I don't know whether he would have beaten Stalin or not, but suppose he did. What would have happened then? We'd have had the Nazi empire on our doorstep.
Yeah, but we'd also have had our own empire, which we systematically lost, and our place in the world declined and collapsed.
Okay, but we've got India and Australia and places like that, but they're a long way away. Whereas the channel is quite narrow, and then you've got the continent full of Nazis.
No, that's true, but there's no evidence that he was interested in invading us. And if you look at even things that he wrote before the war, such as in Mein Kampf, he's quite clear that he's not interested in invading.
Okay,
he did everything he could to broker peace with us.
but maybe he's not planning to invade us. But you've got this genocidal nutcase.
But that's another. But we didn't know that was the case at the time.
Okay, but we do now. So,
we don't know.
hasn't history judged your opinion wrongly?
No, I don't think. I think that there was no need to go to war, and we wrecked ourselves by going to war. And also, if you look at the consequences to this in our own country now, we have the empire has come to Britain, and we have this balkanized society. We have this lack of trust.
That's true.
I think you have to balance that against, yes, there would have been a dictatorship on our doorstep, but I mean, Finland had a dictatorship on its doorstep for a very long time. Now, yet it has managed to flourish, and is now one of the most sought-after places in Europe, really.
Right.
It's got a very high standard of living. Everybody wants to go to Finland. There's constant stream of positive articles about Finland in the newspapers, and it had a dictatorship on its doorstep,
right.
and it kept away from it, and by keeping away from it, it avoided being invaded. I mean, they took about 10% of its territory, but otherwise it avoided being invaded. It kept out of it, and it's doing very, very well.
Yeah.
It's doing a lot better, actually, in a lot of ways than Britain is doing. You don't have, terrorism every so often in Finland. You have a relatively okay, there's things going wrong there now because of immigration, but you have a relatively united society with a very high standard of living, with very low crime, where everyone trusts each other, where everyone gets on. I'd say it's a much better place to live than here.
Ed, I can see your problem here though. That you know loads and loads of stuff about genetics and anthropology and social behaviour and stuff, and you come up with all these interesting theories, but then you say something so out there, like we shouldn't have.
I don't think it's that out there. I mean, there's a mainstream. It's going into the mainstream now. There was a book published only a few weeks ago by this chap called Hitchens that writes the Daily Mail.
Yeah, sure.
And he's arguing the same point. So it's perhaps it was out there 10 years ago. I'm not sure it's that out there anymore.
Right.
We've had this indoctrination since the 40s of appeasement terrible. Of we all did the right thing. And when you invest a great deal in something, I mean, psychologically, you have to convince yourself you've done the right thing, or you'll go mad. But I think we should think about it. Did we really do the right thing? We lost our empire. We've to a certain degree wrecked our country and balkanized our country, and have brought about all kinds of problems.
Yeah, but do you not think that all those tendencies that were bubbling under about the sort of anti-imperialism? I mean,
I think it would. I think
British Empire had reached its zenith. Pretty.
No. I think it would have slowed it down if we hadn't had the war. Of course, all, as you will noted perhaps in At Our Wits' End, all civilizations generally run out of steam,
right,
and collapse. But it's a question of how quickly it happens and how dramatically it happens. You can have managed decline, if you like, where there will be a slowed, or even something dramatic happening and a lot of people getting hurt. And I think that the war put it more in that direction as a fast, speedy thing, and not a good thing.
Okay, but even if we made the wrong decision at the time, as it seemed, surely with hindsight, we would recognise that it's better not having the Nazis on our doorstep.
Yeah, but you can't. I don't think it's very likely that. I mean, if you consider the kind of unstable people as well that were involved in a regime like that, it wouldn't have lasted forever. I don't think it would have invaded Britain. There's very little reason to think it would have invaded Britain. And it probably would have collapsed under its own steam anyway. It's generally what happens to extremist regimes. With the exception of North Korea, they tend to go on for a bit and internally collapse.
So we reckon that by now, Germany would have become nice.
I mean, communism lasted 64 years before in Russia, before it collapsed. And I wouldn't have thought that it would even have lasted that long.
There weren't many Jews, though.
Well, no, but there would have been, because it's not actually clear that they would have... if he is to be taken at face value, what the Nazis wanted to do was simply take back what was taken from them at the Treaty of Versailles, and have a free hand in the East. Those are the two factors. So the reason why he had to go into Poland and so on was because, of course, he invaded part of Poland. The Poles hit back, and so therefore you have to take over the whole country. And it's true as well in other parts of Europe where there was what he wanted was, as far as we can see, as far as what he said, as far as the philosophy of testimony is concerned, if you look in the 20s, what he was saying was he wanted what was taken. He wanted a German Reich and a bit of a free hand in the East. And he can't really be criticised for that, because Poland went for it in the East. I mean, Poland just took areas of the Soviet Union in the East and just took them as their own territory.
Are you saying that... I didn't get this. Are you saying if Britain had not entered the war, there wouldn't have been the final solution?
I wouldn't have thought so. No, not in the form it was in. I mean, one of the reasons for the final solution was that the Germans wanted to get Jewish people. I mean, we're diverging substantially here. Wanted to get Jewish people out of Germany because they hated them. Yeah. Probably in part because Jewish people are more intelligent than them, more successful. But they were left with all these Jewish people in Poland, which they now had, and they had to do something about it, something expedient about it. And of course, they weren't very nice people, and so the expedient thing was what we see.
Yeah.
But it seems to me there is no reason to think that Hitler would have gone beyond what his plan was, which was to take back Versailles, take back what was taken from under Versailles, and to have a free hand in the East. It's a fundamentally stupid thing to do, to treat the vanquished badly, as we did at Versailles. You treat the vanquished badly, then they're going to rise up again. Treat them well, like at the Congress of Vienna. And then we had 100 years of peace.
Yeah.
So it was a fundamentally stupid thing to do, and it was a war in which, of course, Churchill was himself a hawk, and in which the First World War, I mean,
Right.
and in which Churchill was heavily involved.
Right.
So my point is that at the very least, I mean, you seem to disagree with me on this, but at the very you disagree with me on in a firm way, but with regards, at the very least, it should be questioned. This Churchill cult should be open to question. And once you start questioning it, you start thinking about it, and you start thinking, if that image of Churchill, that cultish image of Churchill, is at least partly inaccurate.
Yeah.
Well, let's start thinking about other things. I mean, that we haven't even thought about, haven't even questioned, and that's what got me thinking about Herbert Snake Kinsley, who was this headmaster of his at St George's Ascot between 1882 and 1884, and the image of him, it gets exaggerated over time because you get these popular Churchill biographies. I mean, there's about 3 or 4 published every year, and they don't really cite any primary sources; they just cite each other, and you just end up with this snowball effect. Whereby Churchill becomes more and more gallant and fascinating and whatever, and Snake Kinsley just becomes more and more evil.
Yeah.
And when I read the most recent one, I mentioned earlier, I thought, good God, he beat children. I knew that they used to beat them at prep schools on their bare buttocks. I knew that.
Yeah.
But that he did so until they...
Yeah.
I was like, what? And so he wasn't just a sadist, he was like a coprophiliac. He was turned on by cleaning shit off the walls. Bloody hell, I mean, I want to look into this.
Yeah.
So I started doing so. And what I found was that everything really about him had been exaggerated or taken out of context or just absolutely untrue. So there was one thing where the writer wrote that Churchill's teacher was stated by one of his ex-pupils to be a sodomite. And I traced back the original source, and it said, you may have come to the conclusion that he was an unconscious sodomite. I don't agree.
Right.
That was the original source. So exactly the opposite of what it was being stated as having said. So I started looking into it, and I found, first of all, that there were this whole thing about how they were beaten and so forth. This was absolutely the norm at these prep schools. They would beat children, often for quite minor things, until they were bleeding, basically. Right. So this was the norm. So we can't really have a go at him because of that. That was just how it was accepted to be done at the time. Then there were teachers that were a lot worse than him. For example, there was a case in 1860 of a teacher called Thomas Hopley, who was the headmaster of a prep school in Eastbourne. And he beat this 15-year-old boy who had water on the brain, hydrocephalus, and was thus bad at maths, as you'd expect, called Reginald Cancel. He beat him to death over a period of 2 hours. He then carried his body, he said alive, but obviously dead, to the dormitory, wrapped him up. In the morning, he discovered that he was dead, rang the father and said he died of a heart attack. The maids reported the blood-drenched sheets. He was put on trial for murder, but he was found guilty of manslaughter on the grounds that he was in loco parentis and was entitled to beat the child. There was then the Lord Chief Justice at the time, Coburn, I think the name was, then asserted there had to be some limit on these beatings, and he asserted that it has to be only reasonable force, reasonable and proportionate. So that was how that started to change. And there were others as well. There were many that I did a lot of research into this that were far more severe than Snake Kinsley, and where they were capricious about it as well, where you wouldn't know where you were coming or going, where it would be for very, very minor things like mistakes in your Latin prep or whatever.
Yeah.
Where they used to roast them, hold them against a fire until they passed out.
Oh, what, Tom Brown school days? I thought that was made up.
No, that's not made up. No, there was evidence of that, and just all kinds of unpleasantness. So that's the first point. The second point is that the very negative stuff about him comes from the most unreliable sources. So first, and when you look into these sources, you start to see how unreliable they are. So Churchill, for example, argues that once a week they were lined up, and then there'd always be the reports for that week were read out, and there would always be some child who would be hauled off and beaten, and we'd stand there listening to their screams. That's not true. After the assembly, they'd go away, and then these two children, any child that had a very bad report would be beaten. And it had to be a very bad report. And there's other testimony to that, a very, very bad report. It wasn't just some minor thing. I mean, Roald Dahl talks about being caned at prep school, at Repton, for just like talking during prep or something.
Yeah.
I mean, there's nothing on that level. I mean, that wouldn't get you beaten at that school, and it would at many others. So that's untrue what Churchill says. It's absolute nonsense. There's a rumour that the school was closed down because the beatings were so bad, and the rumour went abroad of it, right? I looked into that. That's absolute rubbish. The school had 40 children when Churchill left in 84. It had 40 children when Snake Kinsley died of a heart attack in 86, aged 38. So there was no evidence of that at all. It didn't even decline when it was taken over by Snake Kinsley's deputy. It declined when Snake Kinsley merged the school with the school in Winchester, called Winton House. It was bought up by another couple of proprietors of these that you had, these entrepreneurial teachers, as it were, that you had at the time, and then it went into decline. So that's not true either. Then also, you should remember with Churchill, he's not necessarily a particularly reliable source. I'll come to that in a minute. But the first one was that Edmund Backhouse. He was an Orientalist, Sir Edmund Backhouse.
Yeah, I've heard of him, yeah.
Yeah, no, he's an absolute fact. He argued that Snake Kinsley was a sodomite. He asserted with his pupils. And he asserted that he was the most appalling person and so on. And he said that he died beating someone, actually in the process of beating someone.
Yeah.
And then they got the birch and put it up Snake Kinsley's bottom, and then he was buried. Now, that's absolute rubbish. Snake Kinsley did not die in July 86, as Backhouse said. We know he died in November in Birmingham at his father's house. Hugh Trevor Roper did a biography of Sir Edmund Backhouse and found that all of his writing was just full of lies. He's a complete fantasist and is just entirely unreliable on pretty much every point. So
this is a sort of niche contribution to
Churchill
scholarship.
Churchilliana,
Churchilliana,
yes.
yeah.
So the second, that's him. So we'll knock that out. Then you have Churchill himself. He says that these beatings were worse than anything that happened at Reform School or under the government, or at Eton or Harrow or whatever. Now, I looked into this. There's one, again, unreliable source that asserts that it was between 15 and 20 strokes of the birch. Now, I looked into this, and that was standard. I actually found evidence at reform schools that until about 1918 or something, it was 20 strokes for an offence. And at Eton and Harrow was similar kind of thing. So that's rubbish. And not only is it rubbish, but he must have known that, Churchill, because he wrote it in 1930, and he'd been Home Secretary. So it seems to me he must have known what went on at reform schools.
Right.
So it was knowingly nonsense. Churchill then said, "Oh, they'd drag him away and we'd hear their screams." That's not true. We know that it didn't happen in their presence. Churchill at one point said that, it's contradictory. In his biography in 1930, which should be more believable because it was written close to the time, he said that, I was ill and they thought I needed sea air, and so they took me to school in Brighton. They took me out of the school.
Yeah.
And what posterity has recorded is that actually he went home from school ill, and the nanny found the wounds on his buttocks and showed them to his mother, and then the mother was horrified, and the nanny said, "We will be taking him away from that place, won't we, my lady?" And then he's taken away. Well, that's absolute rubbish. There's no contemporary evidence for that whatsoever. Moreover, nannies then would undress and bathe children of 8 and 9 and 10, and so the nanny probably would have seen him naked in the holidays throughout his time at St George's, and would have seen these wounds if they were there. So that's something that's
I'm persuaded of this one.
Yeah, that's rubbish. Yeah, not so much with the Germany, but not so much with the sadists. So that's absolute rubbish as well. Then it was asserted that it was the nanny that took him out of the school, and that was asserted by Churchill apparently in the late 50s to his second cousin once removed, Anna Sieber. Yeah. Now, at that time, Churchill was senile. We know that. Certainly, even when he was Prime Minister, he was senile. But he was certainly senile by the late 50s. So nothing he says there can be really taken particularly as good evidence. The memoir itself is full of fibs. One of the things, the 1930 memoir, My Early Life, he writes things like, General Bertha personally arrested me when I was in South Africa and whatever. It's complete nonsense. Yeah. And so on all of these levels, we can say that Churchill is not a particularly reliable source for whatever happened to him at school. And if you look at other sources, which we can do, his behaviour at school was beyond belief. I mean, just unbelievable. There was a chap who, I can't remember his name, the guy that wrote House of Cards.
Michael Dobbs,
right. And he did this presentation on Churchill and how great he was at some festival in Wiltshire in the summer. Yeah. And he said that Churchill stole the headmaster's hat, a straw hat, which was a symbol of his authority, and kicked it to pieces after the headmaster had beaten him for stealing sugar. Right. He stripped him naked to do this, and beat him so badly that then he was seriously ill,
Yeah.
and then this was discovered, and then he was taken away from the school. It was absolutely there's no evidence for this at all. I mean, there was a rumour that he stole the hat, but that was a rumour asserted by someone that was 8 years old at the time, that it supposedly happened, asserting it when he was in his 70s. And he certainly wasn't stripped naked. And his summer term reports for the summer before he was taken away were very good, because the regime was working, as it were. So they didn't happen then. It would be a summer short if it was a straw hat. So on every level, you have these myths that develop. Then you have a chap called Roger Fry, and he was an art critic and whatever. And he asserts that Snake Kingsley was uneducated, which is not true. He had a PhD, which was quite rare at the time, a doctorate. That Snake Kingsley sacked all of any master that was remotely clever and replaced them with stupid ones. Well, I looked at all the masters, and they were all, there was a guy called Cyril Scudamore, who was a noted novelist. There was a guy called Cook Sanders, who was a noted chess player. There was a guy called Richard Blagrove, who was professor of music at the Musical Academy in London. So on every level, it's not true. And you just get this again and again and again. And the sources that are reliable basically say he was Harry Kessler, Aubrey J., who's the grandson of J., who married Jim Callahan's daughter.
Yes.
Peter J. There was an unpublished memoir which Peter J. gave me, and a diary which Peter J.'s cousin, who's Lord J. of Uelm or something, gave me. Maurice Baring, Harry Kessler, Bonham Carter, and they're all clear. Churchill was unbelievably appalling, beyond anything you could imagine. And even when he was unbelievably appalling, he wouldn't get beaten, because the headmaster tried to do something else. He stood up on the table and sang some filthy stable song that he'd learned in Blenheim Stables.
Why was he so appalling?
Well, I guess partly it's just he was born 2 months early, it seems, Churchill. This seems to cause hypoxia, and it's associated with autism and things like this. So and sort of psychopathic personality. So is
that what he had?
I think that's quite good evidence. He was certainly sort of a narcissist, which crosses over with psychopathic personality. An incredible level of risk. He had no interest in other safety, even his own. When he was 18, he was unconscious for quite a while. He jumped over a wall. It's the most incredible risks.
I thought he jumped over a bridge and he was being chased across a bridge and he jumped over the side and reached for a fir tree or something like that.
I read about it in Sir Shane Leslie's memoir, his cousin Sir Shane Leslie, something like that. Anyway, incredible level of risk. He was basically, I think, a high-functioning psychopath, and that's a good thing actually in certain circumstances. In a war, people like
I was
that.
thinking.
People like that.
I mean, you whatever you think of Churchill, you can't. He was
an amazing speaker.
And
an incredibly artistic person, and being artistic as well is a function often of high psychopathology combined with high intelligence and genius as well. Genius, as you saw perhaps there in my other book, high psychopathology basically and high intelligence. So there's many good qualities about him, that's for sure. But he was obviously appallingly behaved at school. I mean, just beyond anything that they could deal with.
Right.
But they wanted to, as it were, make him into a gentleman. And I think they got quite close to doing that. Because his reports were very good by the end. But then he was taken away, and he was put in this school by two spinsters living in Hove. And perhaps it fell apart. So my view really of Snake Kingsley is that he's much maligned and unfairly maligned. And actually, it seems he was an inspiring, teacher. He was probably a sort of pederast, I suppose. But I think I'm afraid that a lot of teachers at prep schools were.
No, I think you've very effectively rescued his reputation. But look, this has been the longest section of a podcast without a break I've ever had. So Should we have a break? We're going to have a break. So you're listening to the Delingpod, as it's now known, apparently, possibly, with me, the wonderful, your special friend, James Delingpole, and my very special inaugural Delingpod guest, Ed Dutton. More in a moment.